Now let's talk about part 2. Rambo First Blood Part 2. That's a mouthful, isn't it? So Rambo First Blood Part 2 is the second of the Rambo series. I think there's 5 of them now. And in my opinion, it's the last good Rambo movie. That's not to say the other Rambo movies don't have their own charm. But as for actual good filmmaking, good drama, and in keeping with the whole messaging of Vietnam and PTSD, this really is the last remnant of taking that concept somewhat seriously before it just transitioned into full-on action blockbuster fare. And nowhere is that transition more obvious than in the naming convention, because this is where it stops being the First Blood franchise and starts being the Rambo franchise. And here we have this weird compromise where it's Rambo, First Blood Part 2. So already you kind of know that things are going to be a little different in this franchise going forward. And I guess something to let you know early on is that the tone has definitely shifted away from kind of the darker, grisly, more introspective First Blood that feels more like a 70s movie in nature. This is definitely an 80s action movie first. It's a smart 80s action movie, but it is still an 80s action movie. And I was actually surprised to find out that they got James Cameron to help write the screenplay. He doesn't direct it, but he did write the screenplay along with Sylvester Stallone. And it shows. This is definitely at home with the James Cameron type action movie, something like Terminator, Terminator 2, Aliens. There's a lot of good action sequences and explosions and exciting chases and a lot of gunplay. And it also has a pretty clever, if not the most subtle message about how expendable the vets were in Vietnam in the eyes of the government. I think that's enough setup. Let's dive right in. So the movie opens a short time after the first movie. Rambo is in prison. His sentence got commuted to hard labor instead of prison time, so he's smashing rocks with a hammer or whatever kind of construction he's doing. When all of a sudden Troutman from the first movie shows up, still played by Richard Crenna, and here his acting is a bit less Shatner-y and a bit more John Wayne. I always thought John Wayne, if he were alive at this time, would have been a great Troutman. I mean, you just take his character from the Green Berets, age him up a little bit, put him in that uniform, and boom, the perfect Colonel Troutman. But unfortunately, John Wayne wasn't alive at this time, so I can only dream. But Richard Crenna does a good job, and he does bring a bit more of that kind of John Wayne Green Beret energy in this movie. He has a bit more to do here. He recruits Rambo for this secret covert op mission, and he is the only person that Rambo trusts on this entire mission. So while in the first movie he was really just there to tell the audience just how awesome Rambo is while Rambo's out hiding in the woods, here you actually see them working together with this mission in Vietnam. So what is this mission? Well, apparently there's speculation that a bunch of POWs are still in Vietnam being held by the Viet Cong, and the government has placed Charles Napier's Murdoch in charge of finding them. And Napier is really great in this role. He's a sleazy government employee. He's a bureaucrat. He hasn't really been in Vietnam. He doesn't understand the culture, the sacrifice, but he just wants to be in and out, no mess. So he has Troutman bring in Rambo because Rambo's a ghost, really. He has no family, no next of kin. He's expendable. I'm sure that word won't inspire any other future movie franchises at all. So when Rambo arrives, the plan is explained. It's a pretty simple plan. Rambo's to go deep into that village and just observe them stealthily, take some photographs, and get out. He's not to engage the enemy. He's not to even bring the POWs out himself. He's just supposed to take pictures and go, and Troutman's special forces will go in and do the dirty work. Yeah, I'm pretty sure Rambo's perfectly fine with just leaving them there if he finds them. We'll find out. But regardless, Rambo agrees, and he is dropped deep into the jungle of Vietnam where he meets his first contact, which is Co, who's a Vietnamese woman working for the Americans. And she's played by Julia Nixon, and she does a pretty good job in this movie. She brings a bit of levity and even a little bit of potential romance to this whole mission. And while Rambo is initially very closed off, all business, she does start to get him to open up a little bit and get a little more introspective about his time in Vietnam. And they do have a few really solid scenes together. So the two of them sneak their way into the enemy camp, and lo and behold, they actually find some POWs. Rambo goes in, and he's not going to take pictures. We knew that going in. Of course he's going to try to get some of them out. Now he only gets one out, and he figures that if he brings them a living POW that can attest to actually being held captive there, that is way more evidence and way more useful to the government than any mere photograph could be. So the three of them now escape the camp, and they're chased, and this big exciting action sequence happens. And when the action sequences go down, they go down in this movie. Now the first movie had good action in it, and there was some really impressive cinematography and set pieces, but for the most part it was just Rambo kind of living out in the woods. And when he did confront people, while he used military tactics, there wasn't a whole lot of eye candy to really get excited about. Here, we are in the jungles of Vietnam. We've got villages, we've got bridges, we've got waterways, we've got boats, helicopters, all kinds of stuff that can go boom. And with a James Cameron script, they're gonna go boom in extraordinary ways. For instance, the first really big action sequence is between two boats, the pirate boat that Rambo is on and the Viet Cong boat. And they're fighting, they're shooting machine guns at each other, and Rambo's got this RPG that blows up the other boat. It's pretty awesome. And now he's got an AK-47, which is probably one of, if not the most durable machine guns that you could grab. And this AK-47 really gets tested in this movie. You see this thing going through the water, you see it going through mud and getting slammed on rocks. It's taking all kinds of damage and punishment, and the thing still fires. And this is about as good a time as any to talk about the realism when it comes to the action in this movie. It's not nearly as realistic as the first movie. Again, this is a James Cameron script. His scripts don't tend to be the most realistic, but they are memorable. And they always have a tinge of plausibility to them, even if it's not that realistic. And First Blood Part 2 is no different. It is plausible, but not necessarily realistic. And since I'm talking about the AK-47, the AK-47 taking the punishment that it does in this movie is probably one of the most realistic aspects of this movie, because the AK-47 really can take that kind of punishment. It's an impressive weapon, and surprisingly more realistic than the exploding arrowheads that he uses later in the movie, so we'll talk about that when that comes up. But first, Rambo has to get to the drop point to get picked up by the helicopter, because this was only a 36-hour mission, and his time's up, so he is running. He is hauling with this POW, and the helicopter's there with Troutman and Kreese from the Karate Kid, and they get orders from Murdoch to abort mission. Murdoch tells them to just leave him there, because Murdoch really didn't want Rambo to find any POWs. He didn't want to have to deal with the paperwork and bureaucracy of what would happen if we actually found POWs. He just wanted to say that he tried and that they didn't find anything, so now they can move on and put Vietnam behind them and move on to whatever the next war is going to be. And Rambo, the POWs, everybody else on the ground is collateral damage. And so they abort. They leave them there, and the helicopter goes back to base, and Troutman yells at Murdoch for a good long while because he deserves it. So Rambo and the POW that he rescued get captured by the Viet Cong and taken back to the village, where Rambo gets tortured. And it turns out it's not just the Viet Cong that are in charge of this whole operation. The Russians are involved, and the Russians are led by Podolsky, played by Steven Berkoff. And while Berkoff has played a lot of villainous characters throughout his career, I will always recognize him as Hitler from War and Remembrance, which was this historical soap opera miniseries from the 80s. And this is the weirdest flex that I think I'll ever have on my channel. I actually own the entire series of War and Remembrance, all 12 volumes on VHS tape. And War and Remembrance is a surprisingly good show. Comment below if you remember or have ever seen War and Remembrance. I am a huge fan of it. I'm a big history buff, and it has a surprising amount of real history in it. It's not just soap opera romance and intrigue, it's real history played out through the lives of a few people, and it's solid. Now, the Winds of War miniseries, this one's a bit more soap opera-y. I don't necessarily recommend it strongly. But War and Remembrance, that is one to check out. Man, that was a tangent. I talked about War and Remembrance longer than I thought I would. But back to the movie. Podolsky and the Viet Cong are torturing him. They're trying to get information out of him. He's not budging. And they want him to radio his base to just tell him to leave Vietnam altogether. Never try again to rescue POWs. Just give it up. And after a bit of electroshock therapy, Rambo agrees and he talks to Murdoch on the radio. And he says, "Murdoch, I'm coming for you." And that is by far the most dramatic scene in the whole movie, because while he's on the radio, everybody is sweating, it's raining outside, there's thunder and lightning crashing at every word. It's a bit cheesy, but I think it's warranted because the animosity for Murdoch has been built up so much, and it's just really cool to watch. Sometimes you just gotta take in a cool moment when it presents itself. And after he makes his threat to Murdoch, Ko arrives and helps him bust out of this facility, and now the fight is on for real. This is the big climactic action battle that we've been waiting for. It's everything you hoped it would be. He's using all the tricks. He's covering himself in mud using stealth. He's flying a helicopter, blowing up the village. He's doing all kinds of crazy stuff. The AK-47 makes another appearance, takes out some dudes with that. But in the midst of all this chaos, there is a romantic moment between Rambo and Ko, and they start making plans for what they're gonna do when they get back to America. And they're gonna start a new life, quiet down, and maybe end up together. And they kiss, and Ko is all excited, and she stands up. And I don't know if this scene was supposed to be hilarious in just how cliched it is, or if this just wasn't a cliche yet, but they had to kind of know that it was funny, right? Because the cliche goes that as soon as your action hero and the romantic partner start making plans for the future, you know that one of them, if not both of them, are going to bite it very soon. I mean, their death certificates are signed, sealed, and delivered. And as you might expect, immediately after they just stop talking, Ko stands up, and just so suddenly, it's really funny. It makes me laugh every time, and I don't think it's supposed to. But she just gets gunned down by machine gun fire and dies. And this rightfully ticks off Rambo. Rambo just starts gunning down those guys, and he kind of refashions his attire to remember her. He uses her little necklace, good luck charm, which I guess wasn't very lucky for her. And he uses a bit of her dress to fashion the headband that became so iconic. And he wages his one-man war on Vietnam. The more I talk about this, Rambo really was the Punisher, right? I mean, Rambo and the Punisher are really just two different takes on the same concept. And it does make me wonder what would have happened in the 80s terrible Punisher movie with Dolph Lundgren if that had been Sylvester Stallone instead. Just something to think about. But it is here in the final fight. Where we see those magical explodey arrows. And these are arrows that instead of a broadhead, it has little like RPG heads on it that just like screw in and then activate when it's locked. And then he shoots it at a building or a vehicle or a person, and they just blow up. And as unrealistic as this invention is, it is really cool and satisfying to see him use these arrows. Especially in that one scene where it's just him and this single Viet Cong by the waterfall. And it's an old-fashioned showdown, and he pulls out that arrow, draws it back, fires, and you just see him blow up. You see bits of him just flying everywhere. That's just everything you want in this type of Rambo movie. But the fight does not end there. He goes back and rescues not one, but all of the POWs that were captured in this village, loads them all into a chopper and flies back to base, drops them off, and now he's coming for Murdoch. He doesn't kill any Americans in this movie, but he definitely vents his rage to the machines and to Murdoch himself, even though he doesn't kill him. But he definitely lets him know that he knows what he tried to do, he knows how two-faced he is, and that Rambo won. He got the POWs out despite Murdoch hindering him the entire way. Oh, and he knees Kreese in the nuts for good measure. And I haven't really talked about Martin Kove in this movie a whole lot, mainly because he doesn't do much. He's just the helicopter pilot. He's kind of sleazy, you know, like Martin Kove is in The Karate Kid. And even though Martin Kove goes by the name Erickson in this movie, I will always believe that that is just Kreese from The Karate Kid, that the Karate Kid universe and the Rambo universe are in the same universe. It just makes a little too much sense, because you have Kreese, who's a Vietnam vet in the Karate Kid movies, and in between Karate Kid 1 and 3 he was on vacation, but he also kind of re-enlisted. They talk about that in Cobra Kai, kind of how he was in and out of the military a few different times. And it's not that big of a stretch to assume that when Kreese was not running Cobra Kai, he was kind of off the grid. They adopted a different name, did some mercenary work with Murdoch in Vietnam, got back in the action, and after his disgrace from Rambo, he kind of goes on vacation to Tahiti or wherever he went right before Karate Kid 3. I don't know, maybe the timeline doesn't work exactly, but in my head, this is all the same universe, and that is Kreese in Rambo 2. And those are my thoughts on Rambo First Blood Part 2. It's a lot of fun, it's engaging, it's exciting, it gets your blood pumping, it's fast paced, and as much as I do love First Blood Part 1, I gotta say, I think I like First Blood Part 2 better. It just has more fast-paced action. You see Rambo in his home, which is Vietnam. It's his element. It's where he's most comfortable, and he actually has some tools at his disposal. I feel like you do learn more about Rambo's experience in the war in this movie because he's back in it, versus the first movie where it was this kind of American simulation of the war. And First Blood Part 2 does all this without sacrificing the deeper messages about how America really did mess up the war in Vietnam. They did not end it well. They don't treat the veterans well. They treat them as expendable. And even though it may not have the same amount of depth as far as analogy and metaphor that the first movie had, the message is still there, and it gives the movie a lightning rod to come back to on an emotional and intellectual level, so that it just doesn't devolve into just cheesy popcorn entertainment just for the sake of popcorn entertainment, like Rambo 3. So for me, Part 2 really is the best of both worlds when it comes to Rambo movies, but what do you think? Let me know in the comments below your thoughts on First Blood Part 2, and if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby, this is my nerdy talk, and I'll see you in the next video.